Hello and welcome back to the third part of my deck collection videos where we go through the last 12 decks in my collection. If you haven't seen the other two yet, they will be in the description box below if you want to go and check them out. And this video, again, has a mixture of some decks I've worked with, some decks I haven't. The first deck that I have to show you is the Crystal Unicorn Tarot. Again, I will list all the decks in the description box below. This was the very first indie deck that I bought from Indiegogo. It is a RWS deck, but with unicorns. I love this deck. It's really, really girly, and I love that. It's, you know, it's really pastel-y colours, very light-hearted, very innocent. Great deck for inner child spreads. Absolutely great for that. It's surprisingly deep, which I think I find with a lot of my more cute decks is that they're very surface level cute, but that doesn't mean they don't have depth, because they absolutely do. And as I say, this one reads very, very much like a traditional RWS, because the imagery is very traditional RWS, but with unicorns. So it's a great deck. It's one that I really, really love, and I do pull out for certain types of spreads every now and again. Next up, we have the Ellis Tarot. Ellis Deck Tarot, this one is actually called. This is a deck that I've talked about a couple of times on my channel already, but I still haven't worked with yet. But I've talked a lot about how I love the visual look of this deck. I really love this epic world, fantasy world sort of theme that this deck has going on. So it very much feels like the whole deck tells this story of this fantasy world, with each of the minor suits being its own race within this fantasy world, and the major arcanas hold the bigger story within them. And it's not something that I've really seen in any other deck. And as a huge lover of the fantasy genre, it's my favourite type of book to read. It's often my favourite types of films to watch. I love fantasy artwork, so this one just really ticks those boxes for me. I haven't worked with it yet, so I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that it's going to be a fun deck to work with, and also a deck that I connect with well. But in terms of the artwork, it ticks all the boxes for me. Next up, another deck that I haven't worked with yet, which I think is a theme for this video. There's more decks in this video that I haven't worked with than in any of the other videos so far, and that is the Modern Witch Tarot. I nearly didn't get this, actually. When I bought the This Might Hurt deck, which I think came first, I'm pretty sure came first, I almost decided not to go ahead with this one, because when I pre-ordered both of these decks, when I pre-ordered this deck, I hadn't pre-ordered the This Might Hurt deck at that point, but when I pre-ordered this deck, I was looking for an RWS that was modern and diverse. So I talk about this a little bit when I talk about the This Might Hurt Tarot in my part 2 video, but I really wanted a deck that was more of a reflection of my personal reality. So it was more modern, it had more diversity in terms of skin colour, gender, just, you know, kind of just a lot more diversity in it than we see in the more traditional RWS. And this deck just really ticked the boxes for me. So when I got the This Might Hurt, I nearly cancelled this deck because the This Might Hurt does the same job, but this one I think is an RWS deck, and that's the difference. This Might Hurt has its own, is an RWS inspired deck, whereas this one, the Modern Witch, I would argue is an RWS deck modernized. So I really love it for that reason. I haven't worked with it yet. I will be working with it hopefully very soon, but I can't foresee any problems with working with this deck at all, because the imagery is so RWS. I'm just going to keep saying that. Next up, we have the Ellis Tarot by Baba Studio. This is probably the most expensive deck that I own, and this was a deck that I got because, for a couple of reasons actually. As I said in previous videos, if you've watched my videos before, you'll know that I'm a huge Alice fan. I love Alice in Wonderland. I'm very drawn to anything Alice related. This was a deck that I had fangirled over with a friend of mine, my tarot buddy, and had kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was never going to own because it was out of print and I was never going to be able to afford to buy an out of print deck at the kind of prices that people sell them at. Then Baba Studios decided to do a second edition. It was after my friend had passed away, so sadly she didn't manage to get a copy of the deck, so I partly bought the deck for her and those kind of memories, but also for myself. And I also happened to have come into a little bit of money at the time that allowed me to be a bit more free about spending the kind of money that I spent on this deck. So I'm really, really happy that it's part of my collection. It's not my favourite deck to read with, but for me, this is a deck that even if I never ever used it again, even if I never ever read with it again, it will stay part of my collection as a collector's item, because for me, anything Alice in Wonderland, I would like to collect. Next we have a deck that you could argue is not really a tarot deck, and that's the Good Tarot by Colette Baron Reid. Now I say that because although it follows the tarot system, it's 78 cards and it's majors and minors, there's 4 suits and the suits represent earth, air, fire and water. This deck doesn't depict itself in any way like an RWS deck. It does very much have an oracle deck feel, and the suits are air, earth, fire and water. They're not what we've come to know as, you know, swords, cups, pentacles and wands. The artwork in no way relates to the traditional meaning of the cards. It is, for all intents and purposes, an oracle deck, in my opinion. But having said that, it's another one that I haven't used yet, and it is one that I have every intention of using for at least 1 month as a tarot deck to see how I get on with it. And if it doesn't work for me as a tarot deck, then I will quite happily put it down as a oracle deck instead, because I do really like the artwork, and I do think the artwork is really evocative and readable, just maybe not as a tarot deck. Next up we have the SpiritSong Tarot. I love Paulina Cassidy's work. I've already mentioned that in a previous video when I talked about the Joie de Vivre deck, but this one is very different to the Joie de Vivre deck. This one is very, very pastel-y feeling. It's an animal deck, which is another thing that I don't normally like. The suits have been changed, so we have shells for cups, which is probably all we're going to see now. There we go, we have crystals for pentacles. See if we come across any more. Feathers are our swords, and then acorns are our wands. So we have different suit names. Every card is an animal of some kind, and the cards all have keywords, which is something that I don't normally like, but that I found very helpful when working with this deck. I did work with this deck for a month. I think I worked with it the beginning of last year actually, and I found it a really enjoyable deck to work with. It's one of those decks where sometimes it goes into my pile to part with and pass on to someone else, and then for whatever reason I decide that I want to keep it and it goes back on my shelf. I'm a bit two minds about this deck, but for now I think it's going to stay in my collection and that I will use it again at some point. Next up is the Wise Dog Tarot by MJ Cullinane. I don't know why I read hers out when I haven't read anybody else's, but there we go. Another deck that I haven't actually read with yet. This was a Indiegogo deck, I believe. There is a walkthrough of this on my channel. This was a deck that I got because I wanted a dog deck in my collection. If you, again, have been around my channel for a while, you may have seen my own little boy, Logan, who I absolutely adore. He's my favourite little man, as I call him. I'm very, very much a dog person, a dog lover, and so I really wanted a dog deck. And there isn't that many out there. There's a lot of cat decks, but there's not so many dog decks. So I haven't worked with this one yet. I don't know how easy this deck is going to be to actually read with, but I do really like it. I really like the artwork. I really like the I really like her style. It's the same style as she uses for the Crow Tarot, which I don't have, but I would like to have. And again, I also like the style. I love this devil card. I love the little chihuahua. Chihuahuas can be vicious, man, but they're so cute. So yeah, I don't know what it's like to read with because I haven't tried it, but imagery-wise, I do really like it. Next up is the Spellcasters Tarot. Again, another deck that I have worked with and really enjoyed more than I thought I would. This is one that does this really weird thing, and it's not really weird. I know a lot of decks do it, but bear with me. Bear with my thought process. It swaps around the wands and the swords, I believe. So in the guidebook, wands are air and swords are fire, but it doesn't make any difference to the way the cards are depicted. It doesn't make any difference to the meaning of the cards, so it seems like a really arbitrary choice. Like, I don't really get the thought process behind it if you're not going to also alter the meanings of the cards themselves and the depictions of the cards themselves. But it's a deck that I really enjoyed working with. I carried on reading the wands and the swords the way that I'm used to reading them, and it didn't make any difference. It didn't come up against any hurdles. It's definitely a deck that I would recommend. Next is the Mystical Manga Tarot. I got this deck because I am a big fan of manga art style. I really, really like this Japanese art style. It's something, I like anime. I haven't read a lot of manga. I haven't read a lot of graphic novels or comic books at all, to be honest. But it's something that I would like to read more of in the future. And it is something where I really, really appreciate the style of art. And again, I have read with this deck. I actually didn't read this one. Oh, the words then were hard. I didn't read with this one for a whole month, purely because in the month that I used it, I started working with another deck, which I no longer have, which I didn't get on with at all. And so after about 11 days, I think, I swapped that deck out for this one. So I haven't used it for a whole month, but as near as damn it. And I really, really enjoyed working with it, found it really easy to read, really love the artwork. Next is the Gilded Tarot, another one that I bought for the artwork. Now, I actually had this deck. Bizarrely, I had this deck. It's one of the very few early decks that I owned. I love this Lover's card. This Lover's card is so Aphrodite and Aries for me that I just love it. But anyway, I had this deck. I'd read with it a lot. It was one that I carried around with me. It was one, I wasn't as connected to it as I was the Robin Wood one, but I still used it. And then it just disappeared off the face of the earth. Like, it literally just disappeared off the face of the earth, never to be seen again. And so I bought a second-hand copy at an event that I was at last year. I haven't used this particular deck yet, but I have read with this deck before. I really like his art style. I really, really enjoy his cards, his decks. I do want to add more of his decks to my collection in the future, but this is the only one that I have at the moment, and I love it. Next up, I have a deck called the Celtic Tarot, but it is not the Celtic Tarot that most people are familiar with. This is an out-of-print one by Julian de Berg, cards illustrated by Mary Gwinnen. I bought this deck many years ago from a store called The Works here in the UK. I have never read with it, ever. It's very much Celtic mythology, which you would expect from a tarot called the Celtic Tarot. And it's one that I'm not sure that I will ever use, but it is one that I don't know that I will get rid of either at this stage, because it is out of print and would be impossible to get hold of again. It's one that I've done a full walkthrough of on my channel before, and I really like it. I do like it. I like going through and reading about the different characters in each of the different cards. But in terms of a deck to read, it's not one that I feel hugely drawn to. However, I don't imagine it would be that difficult to read with, because it is, as you can see, very much an RWS deck. So I think it would be a reasonably easy deck to work with. I just haven't. And last up is the Bonefire Tarot, another one that I haven't worked with yet, but I have done a walkthrough of on my channel where I get very, very excited about this deck. This is one that I am really looking forward to trying out. It's a really, really busy deck, which I didn't think would be for me, but I really love like sitting with it and looking out or looking around and finding all the symbols and giving all the symbols meanings and building up the meanings of the card in my head. And I just really like how every single thing in every single card is deliberate and does mean something. And I'm also a big fan of tattoo style artwork, a big fan. So this one again ticks a lot of boxes for me aesthetically. Less so on the card stock and the card shape and the card size, but you can't have everything. And I imagine this is going to be a really fun deck to work with once I get around to working with it. And that is now all 35 decks in my collection. I hope you enjoyed this little mini series. I say if you haven't checked out the other two, they are in the description box below. If you like this kind of video, give me a thumbs up. And if you are interested in tarot and witchy type content with some personal development stuff thrown in for good luck, then please consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all soon. Take care, everyone. Lots of love.